Everyone. Welcome to the November Wireside Chat. I can't believe it's November already. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA, um, and I'm joined tonight on the first night of the new term by our instructor, Cindy Skaggs. And allow me to introduce my guest. Cindy is the author of 7 novels, 2 novellas, and most recently, a guidebook for new novelists, Dear Someday Writer. That's someday, not Sunday. She holds an MA and an MFA in creative writing and has 10 years of experience teaching writing and creative writing in higher education. She is an advocate for military and veteran issues, and in 2019-2020 spearheaded the Veteran Expressive Writing Workshop in conjunction with the Colorado Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. So Cindy, thank you so much for being here tonight.
No, thank you for having me. What a great introduction. I'm excited. I think we're all in a place where we're trying to balance writing and life, and these kind of conversations help us, not feel so alone in that process.
Amen. Normally, I like to chat a bit before I go into the chat, but there's something in the chat, a great question from Dow or a series of questions. So I'm just going to go to that and then we'll pull out and just talk amongst ourselves for a minute.
Okay.
So Dow says, your work with veterans is inspiring. I'm interested in working similarly with seniors in retirement homes. What tips do you have for someone wanting to initiate a writing program for a specific community? First steps, must-dos, things to avoid.
Oh man. I really lucked into it. First of all, I'm military. I live in my hometown. Like after I got left the military, I came back, and we have 5 bases. So I sort of have a network of military people that help me get started in this. I would say the biggest thing is to be open to opportunities and not prejudge something. Just talking, if I've always felt that when you teach a writing workshop, the people who need to be there to hear what you have to say, they'll be there. And if that's just one person and that's one senior that you reach, you did your job for the day. And so never underestimate something, never feel like something wasn't good enough. You reach the people who were there. As far as like things to do, just know your community, know their needs, and be willing to put yourself out in uncomfortable situations that may not be exactly what you're looking for. You're building the network to do those things. Working with seniors would be great. Most of them have a story they want to tell and they don't know where to start. So you going in there is where that they can start, and they are hungry for the information. They have stories that will make you laugh and cry. So I just say reach out to as many people as you can in that space until you get a yes. And once you get the one yes, then you have the reputation that you can build on and maybe do some larger workshops or things that that are more like what you're hoping to do.
And don't forget that you'll have your MFA, and that's a
Yeah.
credential that would be very useful in opening those kinds of doors, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I got really lucky. The Colorado Humanities reached out to me because I've done a lot of research into fear and trauma. And so my research interests sort of balance what they were looking for, and never underestimate, like have a really strong LinkedIn, because that's where they contacted me, like be all over the place.
So is fear and trauma, is that something, I'm assuming that is something that came about through or is related to your military experience? Is that something also that's present in your writing, in your fiction?
Oh, so much so. So the fear kind of came out of, I always thought that I was afraid to write. Because that's why Dear Someday Writer, because we all think we're going to write someday.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fear. So I studied all the different types of writer's block and their relationship to fear. Um, and then discovered it wasn't fear so much as being ADHD that got in
Mm.
my way. But I am fascinated by it, and I I think where I really started to see the need for this kind of thing was when I was teaching composition. We get a lot of military people that come through, like they're using their GI Bill to get their degree, and they would write and they would tell me their story. And I realized how they just needed to be heard. And so people overshare in their composition essays all the time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something that was an intentional thing that we could do and effectively. Like one of the things with trauma writing or expressive writing is repeating the cycle 4 times. And so those are the kind of things that I learned by studying fear, by studying trauma, and figuring out, even fiction writers who show trauma in their books will sometimes mimic these exact same cycles that we need to do, where a character experiences it and then re-experiences it. And so I do have.
I'm sorry, can you talk about that just a little bit more?
Yeah.
Not to sidetrack you, but I'm very
Okay.
interested in that, like the repeating something 4 times. What does that mean?
So the research was started by Dr. James Panabaker, and he did this. Basically, it's 4 cycles, and the first time you view it from how it feels, and then you move to, I'm trying to think of what in the moment, what happened, how other people might experience it, and then sort of trying to make a whole picture. Because when we experience trauma, we do not experience a linear event. I learned when I did my first MA, I learned from a neuroscientist that when we experience trauma, your brain protects you and it doesn't tell you the whole story because it's more than you can handle. So it gives you pieces. And so part of expressive writing, every time you write it, you are learning a different aspect of it and sort of realigning the events. And so after 4 times, they've done studies where it links to less depression, less suicidal ideation. Like there's so many whole person benefits from writing these things. You can do something similar with journaling, but the idea is that that process of 4 kind of completes the cycle and helps you. um,
It's like you're reintegrating all of the things that you were never able to integrate in the first place.
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
fascinating.
Yeah, and so like when I was in Ireland, we studied Guests of a Nation by Frank O'Connor. And I didn't find out till years later, he wrote that story 4 times. Like he has 4 publicly different versions out there. And I think he was processing his own trauma while he wrote this.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to think about the not just the processing of trauma specifically, but any sort of therapeutic, I don't know, project that's related to writing. I mean, certainly the work that the writing workshops that a writing workshop that you do with students in an MFA program, there may be some processing of trauma involved, hopefully not inflicted by the program, but there may
Yeah.
be trauma involved. But the purpose of those workshops is not primarily to work through trauma, right? The purpose is to complete something that you can sell, complete a short story, complete a novel, whatever. But if you're conducting a writing workshop for veterans, or if you're conducting a writing workshop for seniors, I imagine your focus has to be somewhat different because you're not really prioritizing publication.
Yeah, and well, there's ways that it comes out that's kind of um sneaky. Like I've had students who are triggered by a poem that I share. Like I'm just a writing geek, but I would share things like um, from a military viewpoint, like a poem that's military, but that would be triggering to a student because it's talking about something that they have trauma with.
Hmm.
So it's just being aware that just because we don't know somebody's trauma doesn't mean it's not going to show up in the classroom, in the workshop. And sort of like I was fortunate when I did the expressive writing for veterans, we were in a building with counselors, so they had somewhere to go. But if you're in a writing workshop where it comes up, I think you can't just ignore it because
Right,
then that complicates the trauma, I think.
right.
I think most of the time writers need to get that out and then they can fictionalize it or throw it away or burn it or do whatever they do, but they have to write through it
Mhm.
rather than stopping in the middle of it, I think.
So, and I don't mean to like fasten upon this topic, but I do find it very interesting. So, what about your role as a workshop facilitator? Is if you're in a workshop in this MFA, for example, and you encounter something like that, where something has inadvertently triggered a student, um, how does a writer? I mean, you're not a most writers are not trained therapists.
Right.
But even though they're, teaching a writing workshop, how are they supposed to deal with something like that?
I think first of all, you have to acknowledge it. Like ignoring it is like anything else. If somebody tells you they're bleeding and you just look the other way, like that's also not being a good human. Um, so like for me, I've been fortunate where I can work one-on-one. I think if you're online, you can certainly deal with it one-on-one, but I've been fortunate where I could just take this individual aside and have a conversation. It's like I'm teaching the sort of how to create engagement in online education. And one of the things I talk about is being a whole student teacher. And that means recognizing that people have this in their background and not ignoring that element of who they are, because that's sort of denying who they are. A great example, which is unfortunate, is that a lot of times in a composition class, somebody will tell me something really bad happened to them, but they'll do it in writing. And
Mhm.
because it's in a written form, then I can go to them and we can kind of debrief. There are like legal obligations. So when somebody tells you that they were a victim of a crime, for instance, like my university requires me to then notify our behavioral intervention team so that these students aren't left alone and they have access to somebody not like me, like I'm a writer, and they can give them access to counseling, which I can't do. So I'm more
Mhm.
of a conduit in the education environment. Whereas if I'm working with veterans, I usually have a counselor or somebody else there who is
Right,
licensed to handle those things.
right. And I'm sure that, the more experience that you get in those situations, the better able you are to recognize when they're arising and then handle them.
Yeah. One of the first times I experienced this as a faculty member is I was handing out papers. We used to actually hand out papers that we'd marked up so people could get their feedback. And I slid the paper to one of my students who was prior military, and he jumped out of his skin. And he told me later, like, I came at him from behind, he didn't see me. And because of his military experience, like that, he shut down for the rest of the class. And so
Yeah.
those little things are activities or things that we can learn from. And he was really great at being honest with me, sometimes too honest, about what he was experiencing, so that I wasn't in the position to scare him again, essentially.
Yeah. But I mean, sometimes you don't really know what's going to trigger you until it does.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And that's, and really just as individual writers, that's when we turn to the page. Like it probably doesn't surprise anybody in here. I've kind of seen in the chat, like we all know that writing is healing. We all turn to it when we're upset, and either we're creating fiction or we're journaling or we're trying to find the silver lining in an event. But our natural instinct is usually to turn to writing. And then when you're in a workshop where you're leading, for lack of a better term, civilians, people who don't have the writing experience. You,
Right.
you know,
Love
you're
that.
you're you're,
Civilians.
you're the expert that's going to kind of guide them in that process.
Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about your personal writing journey? And I don't mean in the sense of like sharing a trauma with us or anything, but like, how did you end up, what started you down the path that led to where you are today, I guess, as a writer and an instructor?
I knew I wanted to write from the fifth grade. That was when we got, and I remember this very vividly. I wore purple. Um, I wrote a short story based on a prompt from my fifth grade teacher. And I knew from that point I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote my first book when I was in high school. Um,
Wow.
um, it wasn't good.
No, but
But
still, that's
but
amazing.
I
That's great.
yeah, and I was able to finish it. And I'm kind of sad actually. I was in the military, so somewhere along the way I lost it in one of the moves, but I always knew that I wanted to, and then I kept putting it off, like someday I'll do this and someday I'll
Yes,
do
the
this.
someday writer.
Yeah. And I finally got like really rock bottom. I had just gotten divorced. The kids and I did not have a lot of safety nets. And I just decided this is it. If I don't do it now, I am never going to do it. So, kind of in the middle of complete chaos in my other life, I turned to writing, and it was exactly the therapy I needed, like being able to tell a story from beginning to end and finish it, which I did in my MA, was the start for me. And then I wasn't finished, like I love school. So I went and I got my MFA, and one of them focuses on fiction and the other one on creative nonfiction, which
Okay.
also kind of jumps into that trauma and fear
Yes.
as research. Because I think you have to, if you're writing memoir, you have to learn how to deal with it. Otherwise, you're just living in your own trauma for far too long. And so that's kind of how I got that. Teaching was a whole different aspect. I didn't know I wanted to teach. We talked a little bit beforehand. You said your mom was an English teacher. My mom wanted to be an English teacher. And because of that, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like my mother.
Right.
Um, but I had taken it. I thought, well, this is my backup in case writing doesn't make me $1 million. It did not. So I thought I would teach. And what happened was I fell in love with teaching. I love talking about writing. I love to help people who are just starting out. There is so much joy. We're one of the few industries that is so openly sharing and willing to help other writers. Like in any other industry, there's some gatekeeping. There's, ooh, I don't want this person to, surpass me. There's sort of knowledge that's kind of siloed, but writers love to talk about writing. And I just fell in love with it. Like I've learned to make it like something that's an adjunct to my writing. And sometimes helping a writer find out what's blocking them helps me unblock myself. Um, it also has forced me to understand my process because you have to learn how to explain it to somebody else. And so you have to
Absolutely.
be much clearer than if you just sit down to write. You actually have to think, what is my process? How do I do this? And
Yeah.
I love that. Like I geek out on that stuff.
Yeah. I used to feel like before I became a teacher, I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of various craft elements and techniques that I would employ in my writing. But I had never had to actually explain what the heck I was doing to anybody. I just kind of knew it. And having to explain it made me understand, first of all, well, I didn't understand it half as well as I thought I did. And it brought me to fresh understandings and new perspectives. And my students have done that again and again for me. So I feel like, honestly, it doesn't, it sounds like a cliche, but I really do feel like I learn from my students every term that I'm teaching.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a thing like, the more ways that you incorporate the different modes you incorporate knowledge, the more likely you are to remember something. And so I can remember like doing research on something like how to integrate minor characters and then turning that into a workshop and
Mm.
not intuitively using minor characters when I first started the research. But then the more often I taught it and then went back and revised my work to include some of this information, now writing minor characters is more intuitive. So we don't,
Yeah.
it's not an instant integration. The more we play with it, the better we get at it.
Yeah. And I think that can be that kind of learning curve that you're describing there is one that I think writers at a certain stage, like in an MFA program, can find discouraging, right? Because you feel like you have to keep so much in your mind. You have to be aware of so much that's new to you about the craft of writing that in a way you feel like, well, I'm losing some spontaneity. It's all becoming very forced and rough, and it's not. it's not flowing anymore the way that it once did when I was writing more intuitively, but perhaps not as intentionally. Um, but I don't know if I feel like if, like you say, if you stick with it, then it circles back around, you absorb it, and it does become more intuitive. So
Yeah, and I
you have to
yeah,
just kind of wait it out.
yeah, and you have to like it's accepting that you're not perfect now, but even being able to recognize, ooh, here's a minor character that I could use as a foil for my main character.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to intuitively write that way, but in revisions, you can look at it and think about it in a logical perspective and go, ooh, that thing I learned, I can do that.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit about like what's your writing process, including your revision process? How much is there of the novel in the first draft, and how much comes into play in the revisions that you do?
Wow, that's evolved over time. So my first book I wrote 100% by the seat of my pants. I was doing it as part of my MA, but it was I had way less guidance than students at SNHU do. And I I threw it into the slush pile. I knew who I wanted to publish with, and I just like it was like a year-long process before it was accepted. And then there were disruptions as they always are.
Yeah.
Um,
But
and
still,
I
that's kind of amazing. So your thesis novel, your first novel, was aside from the novel that you wrote in high school, was published. And what was that novel?
so that
What
was
was it?
Untouchable.
Okay.
And that one's interesting for me. Like it's so raw. I like to think I'm a better writer now, but there are things in there that are like real life things, like things
Yeah.
that things that were said or things that I heard or things that happened show up in it. And it's set, that whole series is set in Colorado where I live. And it was a learning book, and I feel blessed that it did get picked out of the slush pile. But my problem was I didn't have a sense of plotting. I had to kind of learn it. And so I could have sold that book. That's a trilogy plus a novella, ultimately, is what that series was. And I was a pantser and I didn't know how to outline. So I literally wrote both books of the next two books because I didn't want to have to write a synopsis, and I didn't have a plan. Like I didn't plot, so I just like, well, let's find out what happens.
Right.
Um, and I did eventually sell them, but it cost me time by quite a bit because I was too afraid of having a synopsis and an outline.
What were you
It
afraid of?
cost.
That would lock you into something that you might want to depart from?
Yeah, like I love the discovery process. It's one of my favorite parts of writing, and I was afraid that I would lose that joy. What I learned afterwards is it's hard to maintain 100% discovery writer in the publishing marketplace that we live in. Because
Right.
even after I finished that's the funny thing is I didn't want to have to write a synopsis. And even though I had a publisher, even though they were going to publish those two books, I still had to write synopses for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
You can't get out of it. So I wish we had studied that for sure. So
It's
now,
funny though the lengths that writers will go to avoid writing synopses. They'll write an entire novel to avoid having to write a synopsis of that novel.
yeah, 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 no, I will do a lot to avoid. Like I will clean my house before I will write sometimes.
So how
Um,
do you learn to outline then? Especially if you're like a natural pantser, how do you train yourself to outline?
so then I'm like, I made a study of it. I can, part of having ADHD is hyper focus. So I just hyper focused on plot and studied a bunch of different methods, figured out which one was most conducive to who I am. I made my children in the fifth grade, they were homeschooled at the time. I made them learn the hero's journey so that I could also kind of go along with them.
Right?
And so now I have a much better intuitive sense for the hero's journey. But I go into it now knowing my main beats. Like I know what the first turning point is going to be. I know what the climax is going to be. I know the ending. And I'm to the point where I can't write the book until I know how it ends.
Yep.
So I don't have everything written. I don't have a 16-page outline, but I know my main beats And then I allow myself to discover what's going to happen between plot point one and plot point two as I'm writing.
Yep. So, and I mean, in a way, you're kind of still giving yourself the freedom to discover what's going on in your book, but giving yourself also some benchmarks, I guess, or guidelines, signposts.
Yeah. And then I tend to, when I'm writing, I write fast and I reread everything that I wrote the day before.
Yep.
And that's my introduction to the next day's writing. And so I'm doing minor edits along the way so that I have
Okay,
less
gotcha.
edits on the other
Yep.
side.
Yep.
And I think that's the trade-off, is if you just discover, you are going to edit more on the other end because you don't know what your story is until it's finished.
Yeah.
And so you just accept that you're going to have more revision. And then those who have the outline in the beginning have left revision on the other side, but they spend more time in the planning phase. So it probably balances out time-wise. It's just accepting that if you're this type of writer, there's going to be one end or the other.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, I don't feel like you can tell if you read a novel. I don't think you could tell whether it was plotted beforehand or kind of its order was imposed, during the revision process by a desperate writer. Um, at least I hope not, because that's how all my books are written.
So you prefer the discovery as well.
I wouldn't say that I prefer it. I mean, one thing that I've discovered about being a writer is you're the kind of writer you are, and you're stuck with being that writer. So it doesn't do you any good to resist that and try to find other ways to write and be more like this other writer over here or more like that writer over there. Instead, you have to embrace whatever your process is, whatever the writer you are is, and then figure out, well, how do I become the best writer that I can be as the writer that I am? And if that involves like a unwieldy process, so be it. I'm very envious of people that can produce, detailed outlines that streamline the process and cut down on the writing time. I haven't been able to figure out how to do that yet. And I don't want to anymore because I realize for me, it is the discovery, because when I start a book, I don't know what it's about. I don't know what I'm writing about yet until
Yeah.
I finished it. And then I'm like, oh, you idiot. Of course, that's what it's about. And then, then the revision part kicks in.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to tell people I was a binge writer, where I would like think about something and just, for sometimes months at a time, I think about it. The book I just started, I didn't realize I started last December, but like just thinking about it. And then when I write, it comes really fast, but I have to be at the right point for it to come fast. And the writer Stephen Graham Jones said, it was some book talk that he gave, that for him, writing is like being in a herd of wild horses and they're going past you, and you just grab one and you hold on until you're done.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect analogy for the way I write. Like I just find that one and try and keep my interest until I get to the end of it.
Yeah. That's great too, because I mean, it implies that there's a lot of stories out there to tell, a lot of
Yeah.
horses to grab onto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me pull a question out of the chat. How can someone learn their writing process? How do you learn to recognize what your writing process is?
Where do you resist?
Mm,
Like if you are in class and you notice that you're struggling with outlining, it might be that you like the discovery process. If you resist, like if you feel like you can't start until you know everything that's going to happen, you're probably an outliner, a plotter.
mhm.
And I would just say give yourself permission, like sit down and play to figure it out. Don't try and um, impose these artificial demands on yourself. Like I had a student one time that was so used to writing late at night that even when their day schedule opened up, they could still only write at 2 a.m.
Yeah,
Then write at 2 a.m.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I trained myself to get up at like 5 in the morning, even though I'm not by any means a morning person, to write. And this was like back, 30 years ago. because that was the only time I had available to write. So I had to write that at that time. Now I don't have to get up at 5 in the morning to write, but I do anyway, because I trained myself to do it. And that seems to be the time at this point where I work best.
I honestly wish I could get up at 5 a.m. and write because I think it would make my life easier.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your book, The Someday Writer, and about ADHD as well, because you mentioned earlier that you were initially thinking that your 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 fear of writing was getting in the way, but it turned out not to be that at all. There's a question in here in the chat that asks, how can I push myself through writer's block? And how can I make myself find a good time to write? And I think those questions are related to your book, The Someday Writer. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I didn't know I had ADHD till my children were diagnosed. And my son's was said to his psych, my son also wants to be an English teacher. And he said, like, I always just thought I was like my mom. And he looked at me and he goes, it is hereditary. So then I had to be diagnosed, like all of us now, my whole family has been diagnosed ADHD. And it was destabilizing at first because all these things that I thought were my personality. I'm a binge writer. It turned out it wasn't me, it was the ADHD. And in fact, when I wrote this book, my son said to me after I was finished, he said, can we talk about the fact that you wrote that book to avoid writing this other book that you want to work on? And the answer to that is no, we cannot talk about that. So what I learned was that I thought that I was afraid to write. I thought it was a psychological block. And what it is that ADHD people or ADD, kind of a similar paths, you have to be interested in something or it has to be urgent. So the interest thing, if you have spent years hyper focused on a story world and you've written, you just know this world inside and out. That hyper focus on that is interest. Not now, sometimes, like I have one book left on a series that is not finished because I'm not saying the book is bad. I'm just saying an ADHD person should not write a series of that length. I kind of lost interest in it because it went too long. I changed. So I learned that the other side of that is urgency. And urgency is a deadline. Like enjoy thesis 1, 2, and 3, because they give you deadlines that are going to force you to write when you do not want to write, and that is urgency. Even to this day, my last fiction book that came out, I wrote 12,000 words one day because I was really
Wow.
behind and I did not want to not make deadline. That was my urgency. And so sometimes you need school or something that's going to force you to meet that deadline. Deadlines work. So I wrote Dear Someday Writer because I think that we talk about craft all the time, but mindset is often the thing that we need help with. So people who are struggling with writer's block, first of all, don't deny it. Like, don't try and tell yourself it's not real. And start to figure out where you're blocked. Like when you sit down to write and suddenly your fridge needs cleaning. What is it that you're avoiding? Is it the discomfort of not knowing? And if it's the discomfort of not knowing, how do you fix that? You plot ahead of time. If it's that you don't like to be trapped and you're like, well, I turned in this outline and now I'm stuck writing the book this way. Well, first of all, none of us stick to our outlines fully. But you may need to be more of a discovery writer. And so you're trying to force yourself to fit into somebody else's definition of writing or what their process is. And what you really need to do is figure out, where are you happiest writing? What genre, what form, and how much guidance do you want yourself to have? Do you need complete freedom, which unfortunately, you have to have an outline in the program that's required? Um, But within that outline, where can you find that freedom so that you still are meeting the needs of your creativity? That will help you in that process. So lean into your strengths. If you love the world building and your first draft has a lot of your world and you need to go back in and layer in some of the internal elements, that's what revisions are for. Chase the thing that you love. You can fix everything else in revision.
How do you know in the revision process what still needs work?
Well, yeah, that's the age-old question. It's always easier to see it in somebody else's work. So I do think it, and I still do this. I still have writing groups that I belong in. Like having a writing community that you can turn your work in and to somebody and say what's working, what's not working. Beta readers, critique partners, writing group. Like stay in community with other writers because they can help you see what you don't see. There are some things, like when you start seeing big chunks of white space because you just started writing the entire thing in dialogue. That's a sign that needs to be revised. When you see huge blocks of text where you've gone 5 pages talking about your story world, you're info dumping and you need to back off from that. So some of those become obvious, like just looking at the page and seeing sort of what patterns you're seeing.
Mhm.
And sometimes you really need another set of eyes on your work. And like use workshop. I cannot express that enough in this program. Workshop is your best friend. Even when you disagree with somebody on how to solve it, they're showing you where the reader doesn't understand your story. And that's your opportunity to write it for the reader. So somebody just said I mostly napped in my chair. If you fall asleep when with your own writing, you need to revise that section. You've got too much info dump or too much, not enough action. Like that's a huge sign.
Here's another great question, and this is bringing up a topic I wanted to address, so I'm just going to ask it out of the chat. What are your thoughts on self-publishing or hybrid publishing? Because I know you are a hybrid writer now.
Yeah. I fully believe in it. I needed, and this is individual writer, I needed, because I had so much angst about writing that I built over decades, I needed somebody in the industry to look at my work and say, yes, this is publishing quality. I did not have the confidence to go into it being an indie publisher right away. If you do, go for it. So what I did, because I'm this kind of person, is I wrote 3 books for my publisher, 3 books and a novella for my publisher, and then I started a new series. And I kind of wanted to compare them side by side to see which were most successful. There are advantages to being hybrid. You're sharing, you're building your audience faster. You're sharing your audience with your publisher's audience, but the trade-off for that is less creative control. And so it really depends on the person. But I think being a hybrid writer is the perfect mix because it gives me the freedom to go off and discover this crazy new world in my indie stuff. And yet the discipline of writing for a publisher who has expectations, who has, multiple editors and the line editor and, everybody in the system that has expectations for your work. It teaches you how to fit within the form for that particular line. And by line editing, I don't mean like actual copy editing, but each line in a publisher has expectations for that line that you've got an editor who's just looking at, does it fit with what our line is? And then you have your editor who's doing your developmental edits, and all of these other things are teaching you to be a better writer so that you can bring those skills into being an indie published writer. So I highly encourage it. I don't know if this is true for everyone, but for me, I make more money on what I indie publish, but it costs me more because I'm paying the editors and the cover designer and all of those on my own. So it's really what you need as a writer and what you're willing to trade.
Yeah.
Like, are you willing to trade creative control for having the use of somebody else's audience?
And by ceding some element of creative control, you mean You mean in traditional publishing, you're ceding creative control? What kind of creative control are you ceding in traditional publishing?
Well, it depends. I have a friend who her first book was a paranormal. She had a ghost in it. She absolutely loved this ghost. And her first publishing contract she was offered, they wanted her to kill the ghost. And she said, no, I'd rather not sign with you because I love the ghost. And then she signed a contract, and the second publisher, after she signed the contract, told her she needed to kill the ghost, need to get
Mhm.
rid of it, just excise it from the story. And it broke her heart. But at that point, she was under contract. And so she
Right.
had less creative control. I've had to
Wow.
change character names. I changed the ending of that first book in a way that I completely disagreed with. Um, because my editor lived in Australia and she did not understand why an FBI agent had a gun, and she thought that he would not be heroic if he killed the bad guy. And
Hmm.
so I had to not have him kill the bad guy. And I thought, well, that's kind of what FBI guys do.
Yeah.
They shouldn't maybe kill them, they should arrest them. I'm just saying
Right.
there was a complete cultural misunderstanding.
Right.
And it was my first book, first contract. I did not have creative control that I
Yeah.
could just say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I guess I want to assure listeners that all traditional publishing isn't like that, that you're not going to be forced to make those kinds of drastic changes. Although usually in traditional publishing, if something of that nature, like something as significant as like killing a significant character in the book, is something that the publisher wants to do, they'll approach you about it beforehand, right? Before you sign the contract. To not do that is kind of shifty and underhanded, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That was very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Um, so let me pull some questions out of the chat here, because there's quite a few. Um, Here's one. I'm not quite sure. I'm just going to read it. Can you publish your own book for free? I do have a publisher right now, but I just want to know which will be more successful.
Well, if you already have a publisher, do a one for one swap and see. Um, can you do it for free? Yes. Should you do it for free is another question.
Yeah.
Every writer is better after editing, and that's Stephen King, James Patterson, Margaret Atwood. Everybody does better with an editor. And so that's the bulk of what you're paying for.
Yeah.
There's things that you can do with cover design or with formatting your book. But I personally don't think you should publish a book that hasn't been edited.
Yeah. And by uh, edited, do you mean like a developmental editor, a line editor, a copy editor, all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay.
I think there are some ways to use beta readers for copy edits or proofreading. Um, but developmentally, I just don't think we can see our own errors.
Yeah.
Like we need another set of eyes who understand our genre. Like my editor specializes in just romance novels. I have given her other things that I do just to get her viewpoint, but that's not her specialty. A developmental editor understands the industry, they understand the expectations of your readership, and they're really, really good at finding plot holes. And those are things that we often don't see in our own work because we know the perfect idea that was in our head and we think it's on the page. And until you have a developmental editor look at it, you often don't know what you missed.
Yeah. Let me pull out another question here. Um, I have a children's picture book manuscript written, but I do not know how to get into Scholastic. Can you please give me any advice? And I wish I could give this person advice, but I'm not an expert on children's books, so I really would not know how to do that. What about you? Do you have any?
I am in the same boat. I have another student who is writing a children's picture book, and I don't even understand how to find an illustrator, let alone get representation on that.
I mean, the Society of Children's Book Illustrators and Artists is a good place to start. They have a lot of resources. So that's what I recommend that you start there and see what you can find. I wish you the best of luck. I mean, that's a tough field to break into, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question: how do you go about finding editors for self-publishing?
I got really lucky. When I first published, so I live in Colorado Springs. Pikes Peak Writers is a large conference. Pikes Peak Writers do a conference every year that's actually known nationwide. And I was fortunate that my publisher came. That was the first time I met my publisher, and I met other writers in the local area who published with them. And they already had connections for editors. Um, Word of mouth is the absolute best way to find a good editor. I Not all editors are the same, and like as you go through the program, you'll have an opportunity to learn about editing as like a teaching track or an a publishing track, and learn some things about editors. I still think word of mouth is best. Paul, do you have other recommendations for that?
Yeah, I mean, I threw a website into the chat, the Editorial Freelancers Association. I used to belong to that. I still do some editorial freelance work. Working on a couple projects right now, in fact. But yeah, I have a website. Jane Friedman is kind enough to mention me or recommend me as an editor in her newsletter. So I get a lot of business that way. But so like you say, word of mouth, right? Um, that I feel like that's really the best way to do it. Weirdly enough, just I still don't even understand how this happened, but you know, I've been reading about all of these scams that are happening lately, where writers get these emails from agents out of the blue, offering them business opportunities and so on and so forth. I received an email from an agent in the UK like a month ago, and I just blew it off. Well, I finally been hit by one of those scams, and then they emailed me again, and then they emailed me again, and I followed up, and it was completely legit. They wanted me to help with a project that they were working on. So now I'm working with an agent in the UK, and I still don't really know how they got my information. I guess I was afraid to ask. Here's another question. Is imposter syndrome common in the editing field as it is in writing? Are you concerned when you start about not being good at it and getting a bad rap? That's a really great question. Can I just jump in
Yeah,
really
go
quick on
ahead.
that one? Yeah, and it's not just getting a bad rep. It's like hurting someone else's book. You know what I mean? If you're a bad editor, you're going to be giving somebody bad advice, and they're not going to know enough not to take it, and you're going to screw up somebody's book. So there's a real moral responsibility, I think, that goes along with editing. It's not a quick way to make a buck. It's something that you got to do because you care a lot about writing and helping writers uh, bring their work to fruition. Um, I think workshopping can be a real help in editing. It helped me a lot. And other than that, I mean, you gotta get your experience somewhere, but not at the expense of the writers that you're editing. So like, maybe don't charge them at first. I mean, I think you deserve to be paid for your work, but if you're still learning how to do something, maybe not. What do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is to become good at critiquing other people's work in probably a collaborative environment first before you go and charge. Because nobody wants to be responsible for messing up somebody else's work, for sure.
Yeah. Here's
Um, I
another one.
just
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just saw this last question and I kind of loved it, which is, do I need perfect grammar
Yeah,
to write
I was
books?
just going to ask you that.
Um, I I may be completely opposite of Paul, so I'm going to let him answer this after, but I don't think so. Like, I can remember the first time I showed my mother my first short story that I ever wrote, her response was, learn how to use commas. And that is really, really painful. I did learn. I taught myself. I got a Grammar for Dummies book when I was in the Air Force. Like I would take it with me in my flight bag and study grammar. If your grammar is marginally incorrect, it could be stylistic. If there are a few grammar errors, copy editors will catch them. But if it seems as if reading your work is a challenge for the reader, then I would say you have to know enough grammar to not make the reader confused.
We're not too different. I mean, what I tell my students, in addition to like learn how to use commas correctly, is like you really don't need to know more about grammar than what would earn you a B in a high school grammar class. And I don't feel like that's really a high bar. There's so many great books out there on grammar. One of my favorites, well, there's obviously, the Strunk and Whites, which is a classic, but I'm quite fond of Dreyer's English, which is a very amusing, witty, but accurate compendium of grammar lore, anything that a writer really needs. So yeah, I think a certain degree of competence is necessary because if you're submitting your work to an agent and it's replete with grammatical and syntactical errors, well, they're not gonna pick it up, and the same with a reader. If you self-publish, you're just gonna turn them off. And it's a way of demonstrating your commitment to your craft to become adept to a certain degree. You don't have to be, you don't have to become a grammar whiz. You don't have to become the equivalent of a copy editor in order to be a writer. But you do need to have some degree of understanding because these are part of your toolkit. Grammar is something that you can wield in order to make your words do what you want them to do. Grammar's not the teacher looking over you with a red pen marking you off. No, the grammar is you learning how to wield the language to make it do what you want it to do on the page. That's why you need to learn grammar. And
Yeah.
Paula says, I think I only write at a sixth grade level, so my story should be pretty easy to read. And so does Stephen King, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen King is certainly, done quite well for himself if he's only writing at a sixth grade level. I think he's capable of writing at many different levels, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And Stephen King is an interesting, he's a great example. He is a discovery writer. He does not outline, and he's pretty open about that. If you haven't read his On Writing, it's fascinating both for the biography element or memoir element and how he writes. And then you can look, so he doesn't do any outlining, and James Patterson is like almost half the length of a book. So, we're on a continuum. And the same thing with grammar, I think.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna scroll. I know there were some other questions in the chat here that I wanted to get to, but the chat is so active. If they scrolled away from me. Let's see if I can find one here. Da, 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 da. Oh, here's a good one. Ask a nice, non-controversial question. Since AI is a hot topic, what's your view on it and how much do you use it in your process? Oh, this could be dangerous.
It could be. No, I just read SNHU's AI policy and I actually agree with, so Dean Wickover's policy is it should never be used for creative work, which is what publishers are saying. I have mixed feelings about AI. I don't know that we needed it, but we live in a world where it exists. So we have to learn how to be ethical users of it. And my thing is if you want to be a writer, you should want to write. But there are things that AI is really good at. It is, for those of you with ADHD, it is really great at executive function. If you say, I need to do this, and this is the time I have, it's going to come up with a schedule for you. If you say, I hate to cook, and these are the foods I like, it will create a meal plan for you. Like there are things that it is very good at, but for writing as a creative act, do we want to write or do we want to have written? And the difference is, do we want the accolades or perceived accolades of being a writer, or do we love the act of writing? And if we love the act of writing, we don't need AI. We may need it for marketing, which I absolutely use it for. I have used it to create graphics for my blog. But the writing itself, like, I love it too much to outsource it.
Yeah, and I would only add to that, I feel like writers are often impatient and they want to know, well, what's the trick? What's the shortcut? And there is no trick. There is no shortcut. AI is not a way to speed your way towards competence as a writer. It's a way to, to slow you down and push you back, to put competence further out of your reach. Because so much of gaining competence in writing takes place through struggle and missteps and mistakes and sorrow and heartbreak and all of those things that go along with, like, understanding that the words that you put on the page are not what they should be and what you imagined them to be and what you so desperately wanted them to be. But AI is not going to make them be what you want them to be. Only you can do that, and it's not easy. I don't want to say there are no shortcuts, because actually I think an MFA is a bit of a shortcut. It will cut your time, your apprenticeship in writing. It will cut that down, simply because, like Cindy mentioned earlier, you're in a community of writers, and that kind of support and that kind of feedback, that's what is going to help you to learn how to overcome the you know the issues you see in your own writing but aren't quite sure how to address yet.
And I'll just add on to that. Learning is a challenge because as human beings, we don't like not knowing. We're very uncomfortable in that space. And so we're looking for the shortcut. But the longer you can be uncomfortable with your lack of knowing, the better your learning process, because you're trying and failing, and that's where you learn. And AI skips that, and then you have no skill to show for what it did for you.
Yeah. So I guess you could say we're pretty anti-AI, but the other thing, Cindy mentioned this too, and I want to come back to it. Ours is a genre-based program, and this is especially true of genre publishers, but it's really true of all publishers right now. They will not publish anything that is connected in any way to AI, whether you've used it to brainstorm, whether you've used it to outline, or whether you actually used it to write or revise your own work. They will not touch it. And if you use it, you will, I don't know, you'll kind of blackball yourself from future work with them. If it comes out, you can try to hide it and disguise it, but I think it will come out because a trained editor and writer is still pretty good at spotting that kind of thing. So that's my advice, is, like, don't use it for anything in this program. Outside the program, do whatever you want. That's your choice to make. Well, we're coming to the end of our hour. I wanted to thank Cindy so much. This was really great. I feel like we could have gone on for even longer.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you'll come back and join us again at some point in the future.
All right.
That would
Well,
be
thank you
awesome.
for having me. Thank you guys for the great questions and the engagement in the chat. I love that.
Yep. And with that, I'll wish everyone good night, and I hope to see you again in a month.
See you guys.